The violent pounding on my front door at 6 in the morning was not how I planned to start my Sunday. Chloe stood there with wild hair and furious eyes, and the second she stepped inside, she threw the deadbolt. She tossed her phone onto the table, displaying a blurry photo of my husband. "Mark did not go to Chicago," she hissed, her voice trembling with adrenaline. "I saw him downtown with a lawyer and your files." "My name is Elena, and until this morning, I thought I was the envy of the neighborhood." That illusion shattered at 6 in the morning when the doorbell screamed through the silence of my suburban home. It was a manic, relentless sound that dragged me out of a deep sleep and sent my heart racing against my ribs. I stumbled downstairs, tightening my silk robe, expecting an emergency, perhaps a neighbor with a medical crisis or a police officer bearing bad news. Instead, I found my younger sister, Chloe, shivering on the porch. As soon as I unlocked the deadbolt, she pushed past me, bringing a gust of cold morning air with her. She did not say hello. She turned around and immediately threw the deadbolt back into place, locking us in. Her hands were shaking violently as she leaned her back against the wood, breathing hard. "Mark!" "He isn't where he says he is," Chloe hissed, her voice trembling with adrenaline. I rubbed my temples, the headache already forming behind my eyes. I was not in the mood for Chloe's dramatics. She had never liked my husband, and her accusations were a recurring theme in my life. "Chloe, please." "Not this again," I said, trying to keep my patience. I drove him to the rideshare at 4:30. His flight was at 5. He is currently somewhere over the Midwest. "You saw him get in a car." "Elena!" "You didn't see him get on a plane," she snapped. She tossed her phone onto my granite kitchen island. The screen was cracked, but the image on it was high definition. It showed a man in a familiar gray trench coat standing in a parking lot. It was undeniably Mark. He was shaking hands with a man I did not recognize. A sharp-faced individual with slicked-back hair standing next to a black sedan. Behind them was a brick building with a bronze plaque. I recognized the location immediately. It was the law offices of a firm downtown known for handling rapid asset liquidation, nowhere near the airport. "Look at his hand," Chloe demanded, pointing a shaking finger at the screen. I zoomed in. Mark was clutching a thick document folder. It was not the standard manila color found in any office supply store. It was a deep, textured navy blue. My stomach dropped. That was not a work file. That was the specific stationery I used for my personal projects, distinct so I would never mix them with household bills. Specifically, it was the binder for Warehouse 4. The cold that washed over me had nothing to do with the open door. Mark had told me he was flying out for a tech conference. He had kissed me goodbye, complained about the early hour, and promised to bring me back deep dish pizza. He was supposed to be in the air right now. My own phone buzzed on the counter, making me jump. The screen lit up with a notification from my husband. I picked it up, my fingers numb. "Just touched down in the Windy City. Exhausted, but missing you already. Love you." I looked from the text message to the photo on Chloe's phone. The timestamp on her photo was 20 minutes ago. He was here. He was lying to my face via satellite while shaking hands with a stranger less than 10 miles away. The contrast between his sweet words and the visual evidence of his betrayal made me feel physically ill. "I followed him," Chloe admitted, her voice dropping to a whisper as she walked over to the counter. I thought he was cheating on you again. I thought I was going to catch him at a motel with some receptionist. But he went straight to that notary office." She looked up at me, her eyes wide with fear. "Elena, cheating is one thing, but why does he have your property deed? Why is he with that lawyer?" I stared at the cheerful emoji at the end of Mark's text. Rage, hot and blinding, wanted to scream. I wanted to call him right now and scream into the receiver until he confessed, but I looked at the blue folder in the photo again. He had taken the physical file from my safe. This was calculated. If I confronted him now, he would spin a lie. He would say it was a surprise or a mistake, or he would destroy the evidence before I could get to it. Do not say a word, I told Chloe. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, devoid of the warmth I usually carried. It was cold, flat, and dangerous. He thinks I am the naive housewife who signs whatever he puts in front of her. I set the phone down, the screen going dark. Let him think he is safe, I said. I need to know exactly what he is selling before I burn him to the ground. The silence in the kitchen was heavy, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator and Chloe's jagged breathing. As I stared at the wall, the last 5 years of my life began to replay in my mind, not as the romance I had desperately tried to curate, but as the slow, systematic erosion of my self-worth. Marrying Mark Sterling was supposed to be my ascent into stability, but to his family, I was always the charity case, the girl from the wrong zip code who had somehow tricked their golden boy into a ring. I could almost smell the cloying perfume his mother, Sylvia Sterling, wore like armor. She was a woman who wielded passive aggression like a scalpel. I remembered the last time she visited, running a gloved finger over my mantle. "Elena, dear," she had said, her voice dripping with faux concern. "You really must learn the difference between cozy and cluttered. We must make sure the house looks presentable for Mark's associates. We do not want them thinking he married down." Mark never defended me. In fact, he often led the charge, though he disguised it as constructive criticism. To the outside world, Mark was a rising star in real estate, a man of vision. Inside these walls, he was a man whose career had flatlined 3 years ago. He spent more time blaming me for his stagnation than he did working. "If you were not so demanding of my time at home," he would often complain while watching television, "I could be out there closing the deal of the century." The irony was bitter. To the Sterlings, my job was a cute little hobby. They knew I worked at Viridian Dynamics, but they assumed I was an administrative assistant or perhaps a low-level coordinator. They had no idea I was a senior risk analyst. They did not know that I spent my days building mathematical models that predicted market collapses and assessed billion-dollar liabilities for multinational corporations. To them, I was just pushing paper. Sunday dinners were the designated time for my weekly humiliation. I would sit at the end of their long mahogany table, picking at dry turkey, while Mark and his father discussed real business. If I ever dared to offer an opinion on interest rates or emerging markets, the table would go silent. Mark would let out a condescending chuckle. "Babe," he would say, patting my hand dismissively. "Stick to the household budget. The big boys are talking." I had learned to shrink myself. I stopped talking about my promotions. I stopped mentioning my bonuses. I let them believe I was mediocre because my success bruised Mark's fragile ego. I hid my competence to keep the peace, a sacrifice he interpreted as incompetence. He had been relentless lately about our finances. "You should let me manage your portfolio," he had insisted just last week, his eyes gleaming with greed. "You are playing house with your little savings accounts. I can get us triple-digit returns." He called my investments play money. He did not know that my play money had outperformed his high-risk ventures for 10 consecutive quarters. That was exactly how we ended up here, with a photo of him selling the one thing he hated most. 2 years ago, when my grandmother passed away and left me a modest inheritance, I did not hand it over to Mark to squander on a flashy car or a doomed crypto scheme. I bought Warehouse 4. It was a derelict structure in the industrial district, covered in graffiti and rust. When I told the family, the mockery was brutal. A scrap heap Sylvia had laughed, covering her mouth with a napkin. "Oh, Elena, you really have no head for value. Do you?" Mark had been furious, screaming that I had thrown $50,000 into a garbage pit. "It is a useless pile of bricks," he had shouted. "You are embarrassing me." Standing there now, The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The respect in our marriage was not just damaged, it had been dead for years. Mark did not love me. He tolerated me because I paid the mortgage while he pretended to be rich. He manipulated me because he thought I was simple. And now, he was trying to sell my property behind my back because he assumed I was too stupid to notice. He thinks I am an idiot, I said softly, the sadness in my chest hardening into cold resolve. Chloe looked at me, her expression fierce. He thinks you are a doormat. He is right, I replied, turning to look at the locked door. I have been a doormat for 5 years, but he forgot one thing about me. What is that? Chloe asked. I assess risk for a living, I said. And Mark just made the worst bet of his life. To Mark and his family, Warehouse 4 was nothing more than a blight on the landscape, a crumbling brick shell surrounded by chain-link fencing in a forgotten corner of the industrial district. That was exactly how I designed it to look. They saw rust and peeling paint, but they lacked the clearance to see what lay behind the reinforced steel walls. I had not bought a scrap heap. I had purchased a fortress. Over the last 2 years, I had quietly funneled every cent of my bonuses and grandmother's inheritance into gutting the interior. I converted the facility into a Tier 3 data haven, a specialized storage facility designed for high-frequency trading firms and private security contractors who needed off-grid servers with zero latency. It was soundproof, climate-controlled, and equipped with a military-grade Faraday cage to block external electronic signals. You have no idea what he just walked into, I murmured, unlocking my secure tablet with a fingerprint scan. What do you mean? Chloe asked, looking over my shoulder. It is just an empty building. Right. That is what you told everyone. I lied. I said simply. I tapped the screen, bringing up the live server status. Last month, I signed a 10-year lease with a subcontractor for the Department of Defense. They are currently storing classified telecommunications hardware in the sub-basement. That building is not just private property anymore. Chloe, it is a federally designated critical infrastructure node. I pulled up the legal status on the screen. A bright red banner flashed across the top of the deed file transfer restricted. Biometric authorization required. Because of the tenant's security level, the property title was flagged in the national database. It could not be sold, transferred, or even refinanced without my retina scan and a physical key card I kept in a safety deposit box. Mark saw a pile of bricks. The federal government saw a national security asset. Look at this, I said, switching to the external security camera archives. I scrolled back 24 hours. Mark had told me he was playing 18 holes of golf with a potential client. The footage showed his silver Audi pulling up to the warehouse gates at 2 p.m. He stepped out, looking smug in his polo shirt, and gestured grandly to 3 men in cheap suits. He brought them there. Chloe whispered, "He is giving them a tour." "He is showing them the exterior," I corrected. "He can't get inside. The doors are rated to withstand a battering ram. He probably told them he lost the keys." We moved to Mark's home office, a room he forbade me from entering because it was his sanctuary of commerce. It smelled of stale coffee and unearned confidence. I did not hesitate. I went straight to his mahogany desk and began pulling out drawers. "Check for a false bottom." I instructed Chloe. "He thinks he is living in a spy movie." Chloe yanked the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet all the way out. Sure enough, taped to the underside was a thick manila envelope. She ripped it open and dumped the contents onto the desk. They were draft contracts. Dozens of them. I picked up the top sheet, and my blood ran cold. It was a purchase agreement for the warehouse, dated for tomorrow. He had practiced forging my signature on a notepad found in the same envelope, loops and curves that looked frighteningly similar to my own. "Look at the buyer," Chloe said, pointing to the company name. "Vista Grande Developments." "That is the shell company his father's golfing buddy runs," I said, connecting the dots instantly. "He is selling the property to them for $400,000. I scoffed. the contract I held with the defense contractor was worth $3 million over the next 5 years. Mark was selling the building for pennies, likely to get a quick infusion of cash to cover his gambling debts or failed investments, while his father's friend would flip the land for a fortune once they realized what was inside. He is going to sell it for the land value, I said, reading the clause about immediate demolition. They plan to tear it down next week. Can they? Chloe asked, her voice high with panic. No, I said, dropping the papers back onto the desk. A dark, terrifying amusement began to bubble up inside me. If Mark tries to sell a building that houses government secrets to a developer without clearance, he isn't just committing fraud against me. I looked at my sister, my eyes locking with hers. He is committing treason against the state, I said. He is literally selling a federal black site to a strip mall developer. The moment he signs that paper, he is not just going to divorce court. He is going to federal prison. I wasted no time. With the forged contracts spread out on the desk like a map of my husband's stupidity, I dialed the number for Marcus, my direct superior at Viridian Dynamics. It was Sunday, but in our line of work, phones were never truly off. Elena Marcus answered on the second ring, his voice sharp. This is an insecure line. Is the asset compromised physical integrity is intact? I said, keeping my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. However, I have reason to believe there is an imminent attempt to transfer the title of the holding facility. An unauthorized party is attempting to sell the shell company that owns the deed. There was a heavy silence on the other end. Elena, Marcus said, his tone dropping an octave. You know the protocols. That facility is housing active defense components. If the title changes hands to a non-cleared entity, that is an immediate Level 4 breach. The Department of Justice will not send a cease and desist letter. They will send a tactical team. I know, I replied. I need you to keep the federal flag on the deed silent for exactly 12 more hours. Do not lock the system yet. Let the transaction attempt go through the initial validation phase. You are playing a dangerous game, Marcus warned. If this goes sideways, it won't, I interrupted. I just need the paper trail to be absolute. I hung up as Chloe gasped from the other side of the room. She was staring at Mark's open laptop. You are not going to believe the audacity of this man, Chloe said, swiveling the screen toward me. It was an open table confirmation. Mark had made a reservation for 8 people at 7 o'clock that evening at the Gilded Lily, the most pretentious and expensive restaurant in the city. The guest list included his parents, his brother David, and the 2 of us. He is planning a reveal. I realized, feeling a wave of nausea. He is going to walk in, pretending to be fresh off the plane from Chicago, and announce that he has saved the day with a massive influx of cash. He is celebrating selling your property before he has even cashed the check, Chloe said, disgusted. Just then, my phone chimed with a priority alert from our joint bank account. I looked down and saw the notification pending deposit $40,000. Source Vista Grande Escrow. He did it, I whispered. He used the forged power of attorney to take the down payment. I stared at the number. $40,000. That was the deposit. That meant he had officially initiated the fraud. He had crossed the line from intent to action. I could stop it now. I could call the bank, freeze the account, and scream at him until he backed down. But that would only result in a messy divorce where he fought me for half of everything I owned. No, I needed a clean break. I needed him gone. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the number for Agent Miller. We had worked together last year when the FBI needed a risk assessment on a domestic terror financing ring. Agent Miller, I said when he picked up. Elena, he replied. To what do I owe the pleasure on a weekend? I have a code red on the Warehouse 4 facility, I said. An individual is currently executing a fraudulent sale of the property to an uncleared commercial developer. He has forged the biometric authorization waivers. Who is the target? Miller asked, his voice shifting instantly to professional detachment. Mark Sterling, I said. The name tasted like ash in my mouth. My husband. There was a long pause. Elena, Miller said softly, you understand what this means if I open this case file. There is no closing it. If he signs that final bill of sale for a federally protected asset, he is looking at 15 to 20 years for wire fraud and theft of government secrets. I cannot protect him just because he is your spouse. I am not asking for protection, I said, my voice cold and hard as steel. I am asking for an arrest team. We will track the transaction, Miller confirmed. If he executes the final signature, we move in. I ended the call and looked at Chloe. She was watching me with a mixture of fear and awe. So she asked, what do we do until 7 o'clock? I walked to the closet and pulled out the red dress Mark hated. He always said it was too bold, too aggressive, that it made me look like I was trying to outshine him. We get dressed, I said. We go to dinner, and we act like the naive, clueless women they think we are. I want to see the look on his face when he thinks he has won. The gilded lily was an assault on the senses, a cavern of gold leaf and velvet designed to make people feel important simply by being there. The Sterling family fit right in. They sat at the center table like royalty holding court, draped in designer labels that I knew were mostly bought on credit cards, which were maxed out. Sylvia Sterling sat across from me, sipping her martini with a delicate, practiced motion. She looked at me, her eyes crinkling with a pity that felt more like a slap. You look rested, Elena, Sylvia said, her voice dripping with sweetness. It must be nice. Poor Mark is out there traversing the country, working himself to the bone to provide for this family, while you sit here enjoying the fruits of his labor. I hope you appreciate him. I clenched my hands into fists beneath the white tablecloth until my knuckles turned white. Beside me, Chloe kicked my shin hard. It was a sharp, physical reminder to keep my mouth shut. Mark is certainly dedicated, I managed to say, forcing a tight smile. David, Mark's younger brother, laughed loudly, drawing the attention of the neighboring tables. He tossed his valet ticket onto the table as if it were a winning lottery ticket. Dedication is key. Right, David said, grinning. Just like that beauty I parked outside. German engineering. 0 to 60 in 3 seconds. You ladies should see the leather interior. It smells like success. I took a sip of water to wash down the bile rising in my throat. I knew for a fact David had borrowed $5,000 from Mark last month just to make the down payment. The entire family was a house of cards built on debt and delusion. And tonight, they were expecting Mark to add another story to their fragile tower. Then, the performance began. Mark strode into the restaurant, feigning a slight rush. His suit jacket slung casually over one shoulder. He scanned the room, spotted us, and put on a dazzling smile that did not quite reach his eyes. Sorry I am late, everyone, Mark announced, his voice booming just loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. The flight from O'Hare was absolute chaos, headwinds all the way. He leaned down to kiss my cheek. I held my breath, but the scent hit me anyway. It was not the stale, recycled air of an airplane cabin. He smelled of expensive champagne and a floral, musky perfume that was definitely not mine. There were no bags under his eyes, no wrinkled clothes from sitting in a cramped seat. He looked fresh, invigorated, and high on his own adrenaline. My poor baby, Sylvia cooed, reaching out to pat his arm. Sit down. Order a drink. You have earned it. Mark slid into the chair at the head of the table. The seat of honor. He signaled the waiter with a snap of his fingers that made me cringe. Champagne, Mark ordered. The vintage bottle. We are celebrating tonight. He looked around the table, his gaze lingering on me with a proprietary gleam. It was the look a farmer gives a prize cow before taking it to market. I have had a very productive trip, Mark said, unbuttoning his collar slightly to look more relaxed. Business is about seizing opportunities where others see nothing. It is about having the vision to turn the old into the new. I looked at the man I had married. I used to think his ambition was sexy, a sign of drive. Now, stripped of my love and trust, I saw him clearly. He was not a visionary. He was a petty thief in a tailored suit, willing to sell his wife's security to buy his family's approval. My phone buzzed against my thigh in my clutch. I slid my hand in and checked the screen, shielding it from view. It was a text from Agent Miller. Target acquired. Visual confirmed inside the venue. Team is in position at the perimeter. Wait for the signal. A cold calm washed over me. The trap was set. To Mark, David shouted, raising his glass. To the Rainmaker. To Mark, Sylvia echoed, beaming. To Mark, I whispered, lifting my glass. Mark grinned at us, basking in the adoration, completely unaware that the woman sitting to his right was the executioner he had invited to his own funeral. Mark picked up a silver spoon and tapped it rhythmically against the rim of his crystal champagne flute. The sharp, high-pitched chiming cut through the ambient chatter of the restaurant, demanding silence not just from our table, but from the diners at the adjacent booths as well. He stood up, buttoning his jacket with a flourish, basking in the attention like a performer on a stage. Everyone, please, Mark said, his voice smooth and laced with an intoxicating mixture of arrogance and alcohol. I have an announcement to make, something that concerns the future of this family. He paused for dramatic effect, letting his gaze sweep over his parents before landing heavily on me. It was a look of triumph, the look of a man who believed he had finally wrestled control from a stubborn child. You all know about that regrettable investment Elena made a few years ago? Mark began, gesturing vaguely in my direction. That dilapidated warehouse in the industrial zone that she has insisted on keeping for sentimental reasons. A ripple of amused laughter went around the table. Sylvia set down her drink and shook her head, her pearl earrings swaying. Oh, that awful place, Sylvia sighed, making a face as if she had smelled something rotting. I told her a dozen times it was a blemish on the family portfolio. It is embarrassing to even list it on our assets. Exactly, Mark said, nodding at his mother. It was dead weight, a rusted anchor dragging us down. Well, today, while I was supposedly resting after my flight, I was actually making moves. I made an executive decision, a decision that a real head of the household has to make when his partner is too emotional to do what is right. He raised his glass higher. I sold it, Mark declared. For a second, there was silence, followed immediately by a round of enthusiastic applause from the Sterling clan. David punched the air. Sylvia clapped her hands together delightedly. Even his father, a man who rarely showed emotion unless it involved stock prices, looked impressed. Good man, his father boomed, leaning forward. That is how you handle business. Cut the losses. How much did you get for that pile of junk? Mark puffed out his chest, expanding with pride. $400,000. Cash. Mark lied effortlessly. I felt a muscle in my jaw jump. $400,000. He had sold a facility housing millions of dollars in classified government hardware for the price of a suburban condo. He had sold it for pennies on the dollar to his friend's shell company, likely skimming a kickback off the top, all while thinking he had pulled off the heist of the century. 400,000. David whistled low and long. For that dump, you are a magician, bro. And here is the best part, Mark continued, riding the high of their approval. He turned to look at his brother. I know things have been tight with the financing for your resort project in Cabo. David, so, I am taking that $400,000 and I am injecting it directly into your development as seed capital. We are keeping the wealth in the family. The audacity was breathtaking. He was not just liquidating my asset, he was publicly gifting the proceeds to his brother's doomed vanity project before the ink was even dry. He was stealing my grandmother's legacy to fund a beach house that would never be built. Mark finally turned his full attention to me. He expected tears, or perhaps a flushed face of embarrassment. He expected me to be the coward wife who would accept his decision because he was the man, and he knew best. Don't look so shocked. Elena, Mark said, his tone dripping with condescension. You will thank me later. I took a piece of garbage and I turned it into an investment. I turned your trash into gold. You should be grateful I have the vision you lack. The table fell silent, waiting for my submission. They wanted me to nod, to apologize for being foolish, to thank Mark for saving me from myself. Instead, a sound cut through the tension like a knife. Chloe started to laugh. It was not a nervous laugh, nor was it joyful. It was a sharp, cold, staccato sound that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. She laughed loud and hard, shaking her head as she looked at Mark with pure, unadulterated pity. What is so funny? Chloe Mark snapped, his smile faltering. Jealous that your sister married a winner, I slowly lifted my head. I let the mask of the submissive wife slide off my face, revealing the cold, analytical expression I wore when I was dismantling a high-risk portfolio at work. I looked Mark dead in the eyes, and for the first time in 5 years, he did not see Elena the housewife. He saw Elena the risk analyst. I am not shocked. Mark, I said, my voice steady and terrifyingly calm. I am just waiting for the punchline. You never went to Chicago. Mark, I said. My voice was not loud, but it cut through the ambient noise of the restaurant like a diamond cutter sliding across glass. The celebratory mood at the table evaporated instantly. Mark froze. The crystal flute of champagne stopped halfway to his lips. He blinked, a flicker of genuine confusion crossing his face before the mask of the gaslighting husband slid back into place. His smile twisted into something patronizing and ugly. What are you talking about? Mark chuckled nervously, looking around the table to rally his audience. I just got off the plane an hour ago. I am exhausted. Babe, are you really going to do this here in front of my family? Save the performance, Chloe said. She reached into her oversized tote bag and pulled out a thick stack of glossy photographs. With a flick of her wrist, she tossed them onto the rotating glass centerpiece of the table. She gave it a hard spin. The photos whirled past every member of the family like a carousel of guilt. There was Mark, shaking hands with the shady lawyer in the downtown parking lot this morning. There was Mark, standing outside the notary office. And there, in vivid high-definition color, was a photo of Mark enjoying a very intimate lunch 2 hours ago with a woman in a red dress who was definitely not a business associate, her hand resting possessively on his knee. Finally, the most damning image, Mark signing a document with a pen in his left hand while holding my distinctive blue project folder. The Sterling family stared at the images. David picked up the one of the mistress and raised an eyebrow, looking more impressed than disgusted. Sylvia, however, did not even flinch. She looked at the photos of the affair and the forgery and waved her hand dismissively, as if swatting away a fly. Oh, honestly, Elena, Sylvia sniffed, looking at me with disdain. Men doing high-level business have to use certain tactics. Sometimes they have to entertain people to close a deal. Do not be so provincial. Jealousy is such an ugly color on you. I felt a strange sense of liberation. The fear of their judgment evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. This is not jealousy, Sylvia, I said, using her first name for the very first time. The shock on her face was immediate. I had always called her Mrs. Sterling or Mother. This is evidence of a felony, I continued. Mark slammed his hand down on the table, making the silverware jump and the wine glasses tremble. He stood up, towering over me, trying to use his physical size to intimidate me back into submission. You dare to follow me! Mark shouted, abandoning the charm entirely. Veins bulged in his neck. I am your husband. I have the right to manage our joint assets. That warehouse is community property, and I made a command decision to sell it. It is not community property, I said, standing up slowly to meet his gaze. I was finished shrinking myself. And it is not an abandoned warehouse. The restaurant had gone quiet. People at the surrounding tables were watching. I did not care. I leased that building 6 months ago. I revealed, my voice steady and projecting clearly. I used my own capital to convert it into a high-security data facility. It is currently fully occupied by a client you really, really do not want to cross. Mark let out a harsh, barking laugh. He looked at his parents, shaking his head. Who he sneered, his voice dripping with mockery. Who did you rent it to? Elena. Some guy selling used auto parts, a discount mattress storage company. I leaned forward, placing my hands flat on the white tablecloth. No, I replied. My tenant is a primary defense contractor for the United States government. The facility houses classified telecommunications servers for the Department of Defense. And you, Mark, just illegally sold a federally protected infrastructure node to a shell company. You just committed treason. The transformation in Mark was instantaneous and absolute. The smug, self-satisfied grin that had been plastered across his face only seconds ago did not just fade. It vanished, replaced by a mask of sheer terror. The blood drained from his cheeks so violently that his skin took on the color of old parchment. He looked from me to his parents, and then back to me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from the water, unable to find oxygen. Before he could form a coherent denial, a sound shattered the heavy silence. His phone, lying on the table next to the wine bucket, began to vibrate and ring with a shrill, demanding tone. Mark looked down. The caller ID flashed a name we all recognized, the shady lawyer he had met in the parking lot that morning. His hand shook uncontrollably as he reached for the device. He swiped the screen to answer, his thumb hitting the speaker icon by mistake in his clumsy panic. Mark. The voice on the other end was not the smooth, confident baritone of a legal professional. It was a high-pitched scream of pure hysteria. Mark, answer me. What the hell did you sell me? I am at dinner, Mark stammered, his voice cracking. Can I call you B? No. You cannot call me back, the lawyer shrieked, the sound echoing through the quiet restaurant. Why is the FBI at my office? Why are their agents kicking in my door right now? They are seizing my servers. Mark, they are seizing everything. You sold me a federal trap. You told me it was a distress sale, not a sting operation. The line went dead with a final sickening click, leaving only the hum of the disconnect tone. Chaos erupted at the table. Mark's father, the man who had just praised his son's business acumen, scrambled to his feet. He looked like a rat sensing the ship was going down. He reached for his jacket, his eyes darting toward the exit. I need to go, he muttered, wiping sweat from his forehead. I can't be here for this. I locked eyes with him. I did not move, but the authority in my gaze froze him in place. Sit down. Robert, I commanded. Running makes you look like an accomplice. And considering the wire transfer went to David's account, you are all already involved. Robert collapsed back into his chair, looking defeated. Mark turned to me. The arrogance was gone, incinerated by the reality of his situation. He looked small. He looked pathetic. Elena. He gasped, his eyes wide and wet. That is just an old warehouse. You are messing with me. Right. This is just some sick joke because you are mad about the affair. Please, baby, just tell them you agreed to the sale. Tell them I had your permission. He lunged across the table, knocking over a crystal glass of water. It shattered, soaking the white tablecloth, but he did not care. He reached for his hands, his fingers clammy and desperate, trying to grasp the wife he had discarded. Fix this, he begged, his voice dropping to a whimper. You can fix this. Just sign a backdated waiver. Please, Elena, they are going to ruin me. I looked at his hands on mine. I felt nothing. No love. No hate. Just the cold indifference of a judge delivering a verdict. I cannot fix this. Mark, I said, pulling my hands away from his grip as if he were contagious. I cannot backdate permission for treason. You forged a signature to sell a national security asset to a foreign-backed shell company. That is a federal crime with a mandatory minimum sentence. There is no bail for what you just did. Sylvia let out a wail that sounded more like a wounded animal than a human being. She slammed her hands on the table, her face twisted in a rictus of fury. "He is your husband," she screamed at me, spittle flying from her lips. "How can you sit there and watch this happen? You are his wife. It is your job to protect him. You did this to him. You set him up. You heartless, evil witch." Chloe leaned forward, resting her chin on her hand, a dangerous smile playing on her lips. "I would save your breath if I were you." "Sylvia," Chloe said, her voice dripping with ice. "You should be worrying about your own defense attorney. We saw the transaction logs. Your name is listed right next to David's on the beneficiary list for the sale proceeds. When the feds freeze the assets, they are coming for your accounts too." The heavy oak doors of the Gilded Lily did not just open, they were thrown wide with a force that rattled the nearby window panes. The sudden crash cut through the low murmur of conversation and the clinking of silverware like a gunshot. The string quartet in the corner stopped playing mid-measure, leaving a heavy, suffocating silence in their wake. 5 men stepped into the foyer. They were not the typical clientele of this establishment. They wore identical dark suits that looked tailored for mobility rather than style, and the man in the lead, Agent Miller, moved with the kinetic energy of a predator who had finally cornered his prey. They marched straight toward our table. The sound of their heavy boots on the polished marble floor was the only thing anyone could hear. Around us, the atmosphere shifted from curiosity to spectacle. I saw phones rising from the sea of tables. The flash of cameras started to pop. The Sterlings, who had spent their entire lives desperate to be seen, were finally getting the attention they craved. But it was the kind that ended careers, not the kind that launched them. Miller stopped directly behind Mark's chair. He did not offer a greeting. He simply reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a leather wallet, and flipped it open to reveal the golden shield of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. "Mark Sterling," Miller announced, his voice booming with authority. "Stand up and place your hands behind your back." Mark looked at the badge, his face draining of the last dregs of color. He did not stand. He shrank back into his chair, shaking his head rapidly. "What? No. No. There is a mistake." Mark stammered, his voice rising in pitch. I didn't do anything. This is a misunderstanding. You are under arrest for wire fraud, forgery of legal documents, and the unauthorized transfer of restricted federal property," Miller recited, his tone flat and devoid of empathy. 2 agents moved in, grabbing Mark by the arms and hauling him to his feet. Mark struggled, kicking his legs like a petulant child. "I only sold my wife's property." Mark screamed, looking around the room, trying to plead his case to the diners who were filming him. "It is a domestic issue. It is a family matter. Tell them, Elena. Tell them it is just a warehouse." Miller stepped into Mark's personal space, silencing him with a glare that could freeze water. "That structure is not a warehouse." "Mr. Sterling," Miller said, his voice dropping to a lethal quiet that carried more weight than his shouting. "That facility is a Level 4 designated secure site. The buyer you signed that contract with is a shell corporation funded by foreign intelligence interests. You did not just sell a building. You attempted to sell national defense secrets to a hostile entity." The air left the room. The accusation hung over the table, heavy and terrifying. Mark was not just a scammer anymore. In the eyes of the law, he was a potential traitor. I didn't know," Mark whispered, tears streaming down his face. "I just wanted the commission. I didn't know ignorance is not a defense for treason," Miller replied coldly. The metal cuffs snapped onto Mark's wrists with a harsh, mechanical click. The sound broke him completely. The arrogant man who had toasted to his own genius 5 minutes ago dissolved into a weeping mess. Mom. Mark wailed, twisting his body to look at Sylvia. "Mom, help me! Don't let them take me, Mom!" It was a pathetic, gut-wrenching sight. A 30-year-old man crying for his mother while being arrested for federal crimes. Sylvia stood up, her hands trembling, reaching out toward him. "Let him go! He is a good boy. He didn't mean it." "Sit down. Ma'am," one of the other agents barked. He moved around the table, holding out a plastic evidence bag. "I need all mobile devices on the table." "Now," the agent commanded, looking at Sylvia, Robert, and David. "Every phone at this table is now evidence in an active espionage investigation." "You can't take my phone," David protested weakly, clutching his device. "I have contacts in there. Hand it over." "Or you go in for obstruction of justice," the agent said. David dropped the phone into the bag as if it were on burning hot. I stood up, stepping away from the chaos. I felt like an observer watching a play from the balcony. Agent Miller turned to me. His demeanor shifted from aggression to professional respect. He held out a clipboard with a pre-typed statement. "Mrs. Sterling," Miller said, handing me a pen. "I need your signature confirming that you did not authorize this transaction and that you alerted us immediately upon discovery of the breach." I took the pen. My hand did not shake. I signed my name with a flourish. Right below the line that condemned my husband to a decade behind bars. "Thank you for your cooperation," Miller said. I handed the clipboard back, smoothing down the skirt of my red dress. Behind me, Mark was being dragged toward the door, still sobbing, his shoes dragging uselessly against the expensive marble floor. I did not look back. I had completed my assessment, identified the risk, and eliminated it. As the agents dragged Mark toward the exit, his shoes scuffing uselessly against the plush carpet, he managed to twist his body around for one final look at me. The pathetic weeping had stopped, replaced by a sudden, jagged clarity. His eyes, red-rimmed and wild, locked onto mine, and the sorrow in them hardened instantly into pure, venomous hatred. "You set me up," Mark screamed, straining against the cuffs, his voice raw. You knew the whole time you let me walk right into a trap." I walked calmly toward him until I was just a foot away. The agents paused, giving me a brief moment of closure. I looked at the man who had belittled my career, mocked my intelligence, and tried to sell my legacy for a quick payout. I felt absolutely nothing for him. "I did not trap you, Mark," I whispered, leaning in close enough that only he could hear the steel in my voice. "I simply took my hands off the wheel. I let you be yourself. I let you be the man you always wanted to be. This is not a trap. This is just the natural result of your own greed." Mark opened his mouth to scream again, but the agents shoved him forward, forcing him through the double doors and into the back of a waiting unmarked SUV. Behind me, there was a soft thud. I turned to see Sylvia collapsing into Robert's arms. It was a theatrical swoon, perfect for the cameras that were still flashing around the room. She lay there, hand against her forehead, wailing about her heart, while Robert looked around helplessly, realizing his family name was now synonymous with federal crime. Chloe stepped up beside me, watching the spectacle with a satisfied smirk. She folded her arms across her chest. "That was a very expensive dinner," Chloe remarked, looking at the uneaten food and the spilled champagne. "But I have to say, it was worth every penny." Agent Miller remained behind as his team cleared the perimeter. He tucked his clipboard under his arm and nodded at me. "We have been trying to crack the shell company your husband sold to for 3 years," Miller said, his voice low. We knew they were buying up infrastructure near secure sites, but we never had a paper trail this explicit until tonight. Your husband was a pawn, Mrs. Sterling, but he was a very willing one. I need you at the field office tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock to finalize your statement. I will be there, I promised. Miller tipped his head in a respectful nod and turned to leave, wading through the crowd of stunned diners and waitstaff. I walked back to the table one last time. The check had been placed discreetly near the centerpiece before the chaos erupted. I opened my clutch and pulled out a stack of cash. I counted out enough to cover exactly 2 covers, mine and Chloe's, plus a generous tip for the traumatized waiter. I left the pile of bills on the tablecloth, right next to David's confiscated phone case. The rest of the bill was the Sterling family's problem now. Let's go, I said to Chloe. We walked out of the Gilded Lily with our heads held high. We ignored the whispers, the pointed fingers, and the flash of smartphone cameras documenting the fall of the Sterling dynasty. Outside, the night air was crisp and cool. I inhaled deeply, filling my lungs with the scent of rain and asphalt. For 5 years, I had felt like I was holding my breath, walking on eggshells, trying to shrink myself to fit into a life that was too small. Now, the air tasted sweet. There was no promise of a fairy tale ending. I had a messy divorce ahead of me, legal depositions, and a lot of paperwork. But the weight was gone. The anvil that had been sitting on my chest was lifted. So, Chloe said, shivering slightly in the evening breeze, where are we going? Back to the house to change the locks before his parents try to loot the place. I looked up at the city skyline, the lights blurring slightly as my eyes adjusted to the dark. A slow, genuine smile spread across my face. It felt foreign, but it felt right. Yes, I replied. We are changing the locks. And tomorrow, I am going to the registrar. I am renaming the warehouse. To what Chloe asked, I haven't decided yet, I said, opening the car door. But it deserves a new name. Something strong, something independent, just like me. Thank you so much for listening to this story. If you enjoyed seeing Elena take back her power, please leave a comment down below telling me where you are listening from. I love reading your stories from all over the world. Don't forget to subscribe to Lily Revenge Stories, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach more people who need a little reminder that karma is real.